They laughed when Clara Hensley ignored the developer's survey and followed a row of rotten cedar fence posts into the creek bottom. By noon, the survey assistant said she was chasing old wood through mud, while a stamped map had already taken her south timberline. But Clara was not trying to prove the fence posts were legal. She was using them to find the stone her father said the floods had buried. The men arrived just after breakfast. A white pickup came first, then a black SUV, then a survey truck with yellow legs sticking out of the bed like a warning. Clara stood on the porch of the old Hensley place and watched them stop beside the south field. The man in the clean jacket was Grant Voss. He worked for Harrow Ridge Development, the company that had bought the land beyond the creek, and planned to cut a road through the timber before winter. Grant smiled before he said anything. That was how Clara knew this was not a neighborly visit. "Miss Hensley," he said, unfolding a map on the hood of his SUV. "We had the boundary confirmed." Clara stepped down from the porch. The survey assistant, a young man named Tyler, planted a metal stake near the edge of her woods and tied orange ribbon to it. The ribbon snapped in the wind. Grant tapped the map. "The line runs here now." Clara looked at the paper. Then she looked at the timber. "That takes my south line." Grant's smile did not move. "It corrects the south line." Clara said, "That timber has been Hensley ground since my great-grandfather bought it." Grant nodded, as if he had expected emotion and already forgiven it. Old family understanding is not the same as a current survey. Tyler laughed softly behind him. Clara heard it. Grant kept talking. "If you disagree, you can hire your own survey crew. But this is stamped, filed, and clean." Clara looked past him toward the creek bottom, where the trees grew thick and dark, and the old fence disappeared under briar and flood silt. "No," she said. Grant blinked. "No? I know where to start." "With what?" Clara pointed toward the timber. "The cedar posts." Tyler laughed again, louder this time. "Cedar posts?" Grant folded the map with careful patience. "Miss Hensley, rotten fence posts do not override a survey." Clara looked at him. "I never said they did. If you've ever seen someone laughed at for trusting an old family record, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from while this line starts telling the truth." By afternoon, half of Mason County knew Clara Hensley was in the creek bottom chasing fence posts. Arlen Brooks, who farmed the West Place, stopped his tractor by the road and shook his head. "You need professionals, Clara." She was kneeling by the first old post, cutting honeysuckle away from the wire. "I know." "Then why are you crawling around in mud?" "Because the professionals started from the wrong place." Arlen looked toward Grant's orange stakes. "They've got equipment." Clara pulled a strand of rusted wire free. "My father had records." Arlen sighed like a man watching someone spend money she did not have. "Records won't stop a bulldozer." "No," Clara said. "But proof might." The proof was in the red ledger. Her father, Earl Hensley, had kept it in the bottom drawer of his desk, under seed receipts, church envelopes, and a broken pocket knife he never threw away. Clara had found it 6 months after the funeral. The cover was cracked. The corners were soft. Every page smelled like dust, pencil lead, and the inside of an old barn. Earl had written about the land the way other men wrote about weather. Not beautifully, precisely. South Field Gate, iron pin behind sycamore. Creek Bend unreliable after flood years. Cedar line still true. Buried stone 8 paces south of last post. Do not trust water to remember a line. Trust stone. Clara had read that sentence more times than she could count. Do not trust water to remember a line. Trust stone. The creek had moved twice in her lifetime. Once after the big flood when she was 11, and once after the spring storms 5 years before her father died. Each time, the bank cut deeper on one side and left silt on the other. Each time, people talked as if the creek had always been where it was now. But Earl had known better. Water moved. Paper could follow the wrong water. Stone stayed where men had set it. The next morning, Clara went back to the first cedar post, with Earl's ledger in a plastic sleeve tucked inside her jacket. The post leaned badly, black at the base, grey at the top, but it was still there. She measured from it to the next one. 27 paces. Earl had written 27. She pushed through briars until her jacket caught and tore at the sleeve. The second post was half buried under driftwood. 29 paces to the third. Earl had written 29. The third stood beside a young ash tree that had grown after the fence was already old. By noon, Tyler was watching from the creek bank with his hands in his pockets. You know those posts could have been moved, he called. Clara did not look up. Not all of them. Fence lines wander. So do creeks. He did not answer that. She followed the posts deeper. The ground changed under her boots. Mud, leaves, roots. Then clay packed hard by floodwater. The old fence line bent away from the creek. That was the first important thing. Grant's survey had followed the present creek curve. Earl's posts did not. They pulled south, away from the water, into a rise of older ground where the sycamores were wider and the soil held limestone chips under the leaves. Clara stopped there. She opened the ledger. Earl had drawn the bend as a crooked mark, then written beside it, "Flood cut after 1978. Legal line does not follow new wash." She stood very still. This was not just a memory. This was a warning. Her father had known the mistake someone would make. He had written it down before anyone came smiling with a stamped map. If your family ever kept old deeds, fence maps, survey notes, or boundary stories, tell me about it below. Sometimes the most important proof is not lost. It is sitting in a drawer, waiting for someone desperate enough to read it properly. By the third day, Clara had found 7 posts. The 8th was gone. At least it looked gone at first. There was only a black hollow where a cedar post had rotted into the ground. But the wire still passed through the dirt, held down by roots. She dug with her hands until she found the post base. Then she marked it with a strip of blue cloth. Tyler came down the bank with a camera and took pictures like he was documenting foolishness. Grant stayed near the truck. He did not like mud. "Miss Hensley," he called, "this is not going to change the filing." Clara wiped mud from the ledger sleeve. "Then you shouldn't be worried." Grant's face tightened. He looked at the orange stakes, then at the old cedar line. For the first time, he did not smile. The last standing post was near a sycamore root that had grown around the old wire. It leaned almost flat, but it pointed south like a finger. Clara's hands were raw by the time she reached it. She checked the ledger. Last cedar post near double sycamore. Stone 8 paces south. Buried after wash. Initials J.H. year 1897. Directional notch east. Clara looked around. There were 2 sycamores twisted together near the creek rise. One had been split by lightning years ago. The other had grown over the old fence wire until the metal disappeared into the bark. She stood at the last post, 8 paces south. 1, 2, 3. Her boots sank into damp silt. 4, 5. A root crossed the ground like a knuckle. 6, 7, 8. Nothing marked the spot. No stone. No sign. Just mud, roots, and flood-packed clay. Arlen Brooks was watching from the edge of the timber. Tyler stood beside him. Grant had finally come down from the road. No one laughed now, but the silence was worse. Clara set the ledger on a dry root and began to dig. At first, she used a shovel. Then the roots got thick, and she switched to a hand trowel. The clay came up in heavy pieces, wet, grey, packed so tight it pulled at the blade. She dug for 20 minutes, then 40. Her shoulders started to ache. Mud streaked her cheek where she had pushed hair from her face. Tyler shifted his weight. Grant looked at his watch. Arlen said softly, "Clara, maybe it washed out." She did not answer. She had her father's ledger open beside her. Stone 8 paces south. Buried after wash. Not moved. Buried. There was a difference. The trowel struck something hard. Not root, not shale, limestone. Clara froze. Then she scraped the clay away with the side of her hand. A pale curve appeared under the mud. She cleared more. The top of the stone emerged, rounded by age, but not broken. Roots crossed over it like fingers. She cut them carefully with pruning shears. Then she brushed the face clean. The first mark appeared. J.H. below it, half filled with dirt. 1897. At the bottom, a notch cut into the stone, pointing east. Nobody spoke. The creek moved behind them. Grant stepped closer, his polished shoes sinking into the mud. Tyler lifted the camera, but did not take the picture. Clara sat back on her heels. Her father had been right. The stone was still there. The land had not forgotten. People had just stopped looking low enough. Before we see what the county found in that stone, subscribe for more Rootmark stories, where old landmarks reveal the truth people try to cover. Clara called the county office that afternoon. The next morning, Marion Pike came out with a records folder, 2 old plat copies, and a look that said she had seen enough boundary fights to trust neither confidence nor anger. Marion had worked county land records for 31 years. She did not care who owned the development company. She did not care that Grant's map was clean. She cared what the deed called for. Clara led her down the cedar line. Marion checked the old posts. She checked the ben. She checked the ledger. Then she knelt beside the stone and ran one finger across the initials. J.H., she said. James Hensley, Clara answered. My great-great-grandfather. Marion opened the oldest plat copy. Original south corner marker listed as limestone fieldstone with east-facing notch, set by J. Hensley, 1897. Grant said, but the creek line... Marion did not look up. The deed does not say the boundary follows the current creek line. It references the original creek bend, the cedar fence, and the stone marker. Tyler looked at Grant. Grant looked at the stone. Marion stood and brushed mud from her knees. The modern survey appears to have started from the current wash, not the original marker call. Grant's jaw moved once. No words came out. Marion closed her folder. This needs correction before anything gets filed as final. The orange stakes came out that afternoon. Not all of them. Just the ones on Clara's side. Tyler pulled them quietly, one by one, with mud on his knees and no laughter left in his mouth. Grant stood by the SUV, making phone calls in a lower voice than before. Arlen Brooks watched from the road. When Clara came up from the timber, he took off his cap. "I thought you were chasing fence posts," he said. Clara looked back toward the creek bottom. "I was." Arlen frowned. "But the stone was the proof." "Yes." He looked at the line of cedar posts vanishing into the trees. "So, what were the posts?" Clara held the red ledger against her chest. "The way to find it." By the next week, the corrected line was marked. Not with bright orange flags from Harrow Ridge, with county tape, iron pins, and the old limestone boundary stone uncovered, photographed, and recorded where it had always been. The south timberline stayed with the Hensley place. The road Harrow Ridge wanted to cut had to bend around it. That cost them money. Not enough to ruin them. Just enough to remind them that land is not empty because someone new has not learned how to read it. Clara went back to the creek bottom alone after the county crew left. She cleaned the stone one more time. Not too much. Enough to see it. Not enough to make it look new. The cedar posts leaned behind her, rotten and stubborn, still holding the shape of a line men had stopped respecting. She opened her father's ledger and wrote beneath his last note. Stone found. Line confirmed. Flood wash wrong. Cedar posts held. Then she paused and added one more sentence. You were right. She let the ink dry before closing the book. Near sunset, a boy from the next farm came down to the fence. He was 13, maybe 14, with his grandfather's old cap pulled too low over his eyes. My dad said, you beat the survey. Clara slid the ledger under her arm. No, she said. The stone did. The boy looked at the old posts. My dad said those were just rotten wood. They are. Then why did you trust them? Clara looked at the timberline, the mud, the creek that had shifted and shifted again, and the pale stone still set in the ground where hands had placed it more than a century before. I didn't trust the posts, she said. I trusted what they were pointing to. The boy thought about that. What if there hadn't been a stone? Then I would have known the line was harder to prove. And if your father hadn't written it down? Clara looked at the red ledger. Then I would have had to learn the land the slow way. The boy looked toward the creek. It's strange, he said. All that was under the mud. Clara rested her hand on the old cedar post. No, she said. It was under people not looking. If this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who knows land is more than lines on new paper. Drop your city in the comments and tell me if your family ever kept an old deed, map, ledger, or boundary story that later turned out to matter. Because the land had not forgotten the line. The roots had covered it. The floods had buried it. The new map had missed it. But the stone was still there, waiting beneath the mud for someone willing to follow the old marks all the way to the truth.